The heavy oak doors of the Oversight Committee chamber creaked open with a slow, deliberate push, the kind of sound that makes an entire room pause for just a second. Jasmine Crockett stepped inside her heels, striking the polished marble floor in a steady rhythm, each click echoing through the chamber like the countdown to something inevitable. Her dark suit was perfectly tailored, framing a posture that was both poised and unyielding. But it wasn't her clothes, her walk, or even her expression that drew every eye. It was the thing in her hand, a plain manila envelope. Its seal was still unbroken and the paper edges worn soft from being carried for weeks, maybe months. To anyone else, it looked ordinary, the kind of envelope you might find in a filing cabinet. But Jasmine knew better. And deep down, the people in this room, the lawmakers, the reporters, the staffers, they could feel it too. Something about the way she held it, not casually, but with the care of someone carrying something sacred or radioactive. The air in the chamber felt different, heavier. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the room. Every seat was taken. 38 million Americans were watching live from their living rooms, office break rooms, and phones clutched in trembling hands. Camera lenses tracked her every move, gliding along rails like hunters waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Across the long wooden table, Donald J. Trump sat surrounded by his legal team and political allies. He looked comfortable, too comfortable. The smirk on his face was the same one he had worn in hundreds of rallies, debates, and press conferences. The kind of smirk that said, "I own this room." He leaned forward, just slightly adjusted his microphone, and locked his eyes on her. Then, with a voice full of practiced confidence, he let the words fly. "People like her don't understand family values." The sentence cut through the air, bouncing off the marble walls like a thrown stone in a still pond. His allies reacted instantly, a ripple of low laughter, smug smiles spreading along his side of the chamber. A few aides glanced at each other with knowing grins. One congressman even clapped softly as if rewarding a well-delivered punchline. They thought it was just another jab. They thought it was another easy win, another moment they could clip for social media and replay to their base. They thought Jasmine Crockett was just here to take a beating, but they didn't know what was in that envelope. They didn't know that in the next few moments, the entire balance of power in this room and maybe far beyond it was about to shift. Jasmine reached the witness table without saying a word. She slid into her seat, the manila envelope still in her hand. For a moment, she simply looked at it, not as if she were nervous, but as if she knew exactly when and how it would speak for her. Then, with slow precision, she placed it flat on the polished oak desk. Her fingers tapped the envelope once. A single, deliberate tap. It was subtle, almost nothing at all, but the sound carried through the chamber like a gun being cocked. People who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. The shuffle of papers went silent. Even the camera operators adjusted their focus, sensing something had shifted. On the far side of the table, Trump's smirk twitched almost imperceptibly. The lens of camera 2 lingered on him, zooming in slowly. His eyes, still sharp, darted for just a second toward the envelope before returning to Jasmine. Her face didn't change, her breathing didn't quicken, and yet in that stillness, the entire room felt the change in temperature, the quiet before a storm no one was ready for. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter scribbled 3 words in their notebook. What's inside there? Across the country, in living rooms and break rooms, millions of viewers found themselves leaning closer to their screens without even realizing it. They didn't know it yet, but in a matter of minutes, that envelope would stop being just paper and glue. It would become the match that lit an inferno. 3 weeks earlier, the scene couldn't have been more different. No marble walls, no cameras, no audience of millions. Just the dim, flickering light of a single bulb in the basement of a small church on the west side of San Antonio. The air smelled faintly of old hymn books and incense that had long since burned away. Folding chairs sat in a half circle, their metal legs scraping the concrete floor whenever someone shifted. Maria Alvarez sat in one of them, her hands clasped so tightly around the manila envelope that her knuckles had turned white. Her shoulders trembled with each uneven breath, and her eyes, rimmed in red from nights without sleep, darted up when Jasmine Crockett stepped through the narrow doorway. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She simply walked over, pulled a chair across from Maria, and sat down, her posture calm but open. She'd seen fear before in witnesses and victims, in the rare moments when the truth felt too heavy to carry alone. But this was something deeper. Maria's fingers hesitated on the envelope, then she slid it across the table. Her voice cracked each word, weighted with years of silence. He is the father of my child. The words hung in the stale air like incense smoke, slow to fade, impossible to ignore. Jasmine didn't rush to open the envelope. She placed her hand over it gently, not as a politician, but as a human being. Jasmine didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, she let her hand rest on it, feeling the faint texture of the paper, the slight give of the contents inside. She knew that once she broke the seal, there would be no going back. Her mind was already racing ahead to what this would mean. If she brought this into the light, she wouldn't just be revealing a personal scandal, she would be taking aim at one of the most powerful political machines in the country. And machines like that didn't just defend themselves, they destroyed. She pictured the headlines. She could already hear the talking points on cable news: partisan hit job, fabricated evidence, political theater. She could see the swarm of cameras outside her office, reporters shouting questions meant to twist her answers. She could imagine the threats not just to her career, but to her safety, to the people she loved. This wasn't just a political risk. It was a personal one. Her mind flashed to history, to the whistleblowers and truth-tellers who had come before her. Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers. Mark Felt, the hidden source behind Watergate. They had faced smear campaigns, lawsuits, and the full weight of government power aimed directly at them. She remembered the grainy footage of Watergate hearings, men in suits, the weight of a nation's trust hanging in the air, and the slow, unstoppable drip of truth that toppled a presidency. Jasmine knew the stakes were just as high. This wasn't about political theater. This was about whether truth could still break through in a country drowning in noise. She finally looked up at Maria, whose eyes were searching her face for some sign, any sign that she understood what was at risk. Jasmine nodded once, her voice quiet but certain. If I do this, they will come after both of us. Are you ready for that? The chairman had barely finished introducing the agenda when Trump leaned into his microphone again. His voice carried that familiar mocking lilt, the tone of a man who knew his words would be replayed on friendly networks within the hour. People like her don't understand family values, he repeated slower this time, as if savoring the line. The reaction was instant. On the Republican side of the chamber, the smirks multiplied. A few aides exchanged grins. One congressman chuckled out loud, the sound sharp in the otherwise tense air. It spread quickly like a spark catching dry grass, a chain reaction of subtle laughs, head shakes, and smug whispers. The message was clear. They weren't just laughing at her words, they were laughing at her. Jasmine sat perfectly still. She didn't reach for the microphone. She didn't glance at the chairman. She didn't even look at Trump. Her eyes stayed on the envelope in front of her, the way a chess player keeps their gaze on the board, not the opponent's face. She could feel the weight of the cameras, the press gallery leaning, in the millions watching at home, wondering if she'd fire back. Inside, the pressure was immense, a tide rising against her ribs. Every instinct in a political fight screams to swing back to match insult with fire. But she knew better. Silence in the right hands can be more dangerous than shouting. So she stayed quiet, and in that quiet, something shifted. On television screens across the country, the laughter on one side of the chamber began to feel less like victory and more like arrogance. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like hesitation, as if Jasmine was unsure, maybe even intimidated by the jeers from across the chamber. But those who knew her, those who understood the rhythm of a courtroom or a congressional hearing, recognized something else entirely. This was strategy. There were two battles happening here, one in the public eye and one on the record. Legally, she couldn't afford to drop her evidence too soon. If she revealed the DNA results at the wrong moment, the other side would seize on any technicality, chain of custody, admissibility, hearsay, to drown it before it ever reached the public record. By holding back, she made sure they couldn't swat it away as a premature leak or unsubstantiated claim. And then there was the psychological battle. The longer she kept that envelope sealed, the more it grew in the minds of everyone in the room. To Trump, it was a closed door he couldn't open. To the press, it was a headline waiting to explode. To the viewers at home, it was a secret they had to know. Jasmine understood tension the way a conductor understands music. You don't hit the loudest note first. You build toward it, let the anticipation stretch until it's almost unbearable. That's when it lands with the most force. Her eyes never left the envelope. Not once. Even as the laughter subsided into awkward shifting on the Republican side, even as the chairman glanced her way, With a raised brow, she stayed locked in. Every second she refused to look up told the same story. I'm not here to trade insults. I'm here to end this. The moment came without warning. Jasmine finally lifted her gaze from the envelope and looked straight at the chairman. Mr. Chairman, she began, her voice calm and steady. I wasn't planning to do this today, but since we're talking about family, she slid the envelope closer to her, broke the seal with a single deliberate motion, and withdrew one crisp sheet of paper. The sound of the paper sliding free was louder than it should have been, or maybe the room had just gone that quiet. Her eyes didn't leave the document as she spoke the name Lucia Maria Alvarez, 11 years old. No father listed until now. The chamber froze. Somewhere in the press gallery, a pen slipped from a reporter's hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound rang out in the silence, sharp as a gunshot. A few seats away, another journalist stopped typing mid-sentence, her eyes wide. Trump leaned forward abruptly. This is fake, he barked, but his voice, usually so forceful, carried a thin crack at the edges. The timbre was wrong. The confidence wasn't there. It was the sound of a man who, for the first time in a very long time, wasn't sure if he still controlled the room. Jasmine didn't argue with Trump. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached into her black notebook and pulled out a small, clear evidence bag. Inside, a faded cloth bracelet, the kind handed out in campaign rallies. The letters Trump 2020 were still visible, though smeared with dirt and something darker. Dried blood. She set it gently on the table right beside the document she just read from. No theatrics, no flourish, just the quiet placement of an object that carried more weight than 1,000 speeches. This, she said, her tone low, but cutting, was on Lucia's wrist the day she was detained in McAllen, Texas. Her ID tag had broken. They replaced it with this. The room seemed to shrink around the bracelet. Cameras zoomed in tight, the lens capturing the frayed edges, the rusty brown stains, the cheap stitching of a slogan meant for politics now wrapped around the wrist of an 11-year-old girl sitting in a detention cell. Jasmine didn't need to explain what those stains meant. Everyone could see it, and that was the point. Because objects don't argue, objects don't spin, objects don't forget. They just sit there holding the truth in a way words never can. Jasmine didn't say another word. Instead, she reached for a small remote, pressed a single button, and the screens behind her flickered to life. The image that appeared was simple, no dramatic lighting, no stage background. Just Maria Alvarez seated on a folding chair against a plain white wall. Her hair was pulled back, her hands resting in her lap. There was no makeup to hide the weariness in her face. When she began to speak, her voice was soft, but it carried an edge that came from years of holding something in. I met him when I was 19, she said. I worked at Mar-a-Lago cleaning rooms, folding towels, serving drinks I couldn't even pronounce. She looked down for a moment, her fingers twisting together. When I told him I was pregnant, he told me to disappear. And I did. I left Florida. I changed my name. I raised my daughter in the shadows because I thought it was the only way to keep her safe. Her words weren't polished like a politician's speech. They were raw, jagged, and real. Every pause, every quiver in her tone was a reminder that this wasn't theater. This was her life. On the other side of the room, even the most seasoned reporters stopped taking notes. Their eyes were locked on the screen. You could feel the shift, the way the chamber stopped being a political stage and became something else entirely, a witness stand. Maria's voice cracked, but she didn't break. She is 11 now, and she has the right to be seen. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of shame, of anger, of something unspoken passing between everyone in that room. Before the last frame of Mariah's video had even faded to black, Jasmine lifted her hand toward the chamber doors. They opened slowly, and in stepped a woman in her mid-50s, wearing a modest navy dress, her hospital ID still clipped to the pocket. The murmurs started instantly. She walked with the steady, deliberate pace of someone carrying both the weight of truth and the risk of speaking it. Jasmine introduced her quietly. This is Clara Esteban, the nurse who delivered Lucia. Gasps rippled across the room. Even some members of the Republican bench leaned forward. Clara adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the podium. It was the summer of 2013. She began, her voice measured but charged with memory. I was working the night shift at a small clinic near El Paso. Maria was in labor alone, terrified. But an hour later, he walked in. She paused. Her gaze drifted toward Trump, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes broke contact. He held the baby. He looked right at her and said, Clara's voice caught and she had to swallow hard before finishing, "You're better off never knowing me." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Clara took a deep breath, her tone firm now. "I have carried that night with me for 12 years. I told myself it wasn't my place to speak, but seeing Maria's courage, I knew it was time." In that moment, the hearing room didn't feel like politics. It felt like a confession years overdue, one that could no longer be buried. Within minutes of Clara's testimony hitting the airwaves, the internet went nuclear. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, every platform lit up like a Christmas tree in the middle of a thunderstorm. The hashtag Justice for Lucia shot to #1 worldwide in less than 30 minutes. Right behind it, hashtag Din on the Hill. Clips of Jasmine placing the manila envelope on the table were replayed in slow motion, dissected frame by millions of viewers. Others zeroed in on the exact moment Trump's smirk dissolved, looping it into GIFs, memes, and reaction videos. On TikTok, one user stitched the clip with Mariah's trembling voice, "As the father of my child." The video hit 12 million views in a single afternoon. By nightfall, it was on every major news network. Outside the Capitol, the streets became a sea of people. Hundreds swelled into thousands, then into a roaring crowd. Handmade signs rose above the chaos. "She's not invisible. Truth has a face test." The DNA from above news helicopters captured the scene. The marble steps of Congress flooded with citizens chanting in unison, "Lucia, Lucia, Lucia." It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a movement. The chamber was electric, every seat filled, every camera lens locked in, every breath held. The clerk began reading the roll call, each yea or nay echoing like a drumbeat. Jasmine sat in the witness chair, her hands folded, eyes fixed on the marble floor. Trump sat just a few rows behind his legal team, jaw-tight, arms crossed. Every time a Democrat voted, yea murmurs rippled through the room. Every time a Republican shouted nay, his allies nodded sharply. The scoreboard on the wall ticked upward, 210, 215, 217, and then the number everyone was waiting for, 218. The threshold was crossed. The House had officially voted to open a formal investigation into the allegations surrounding Lucia. For a split second, there was silence, the kind that happens when history changes in real time. Then the explosion came. Pockets of the Republican side erupted in outrage. "Witch hunt," they shouted, pounding their desks. But their voices, once booming, now sounded brittle, almost desperate. On the other side, Democratic members rose to their feet. Applause, cheers, and the unmistakable hum of momentum filled the air. Outside, the chanting crowd got even louder, the sound flooding into the chamber through the heavy wooden doors. Trump didn't move. He just stared straight ahead, the fight draining from his expression, as if he'd realized this was no longer a battle he could control. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in a small park tucked away from the chaos of the city. No cameras, no microphones, no staffers hovering nearby. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. Jasmine spotted her instantly, a young girl sitting on a worn wooden bench, sunlight spilling over her shoulders. Lucia. She looked smaller than Jasmine had imagined, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd lived a lifetime in the shadows. For a moment, neither spoke. Jasmine walked over slowly, her heart pounding harder with each step. She sat down beside Lucia, close enough to feel the nervous tremble in the girl's hands. Lucia turned to her, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I'm American now?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. She looked her straight in the eye. "You always were." The words seemed to break something loose. Lucia blinked rapidly, and then the tears came, silent, shaking sobs that had been locked away for years. Jasmine reached over, pulled her into a tight embrace, and for the first time in a long time, the girl didn't feel invisible. A week later, an envelope arrived at Jasmine's office, not the kind that carried secrets meant to be hidden, but one meant to be shared. Inside was a single handwritten letter from Lucia. The paper was simple, but the words were heavy with truth. "This is my truth. I'm not hiding anymore." Jasmine read it twice, then 3 times, her throat tightening. She knew this wasn't just a letter from a young girl. It was a declaration, a refusal to be erased. And as the final images of this story fade from the screen, remember this: justice doesn't come from silence. It comes from the courage to stand, to speak, and to tell the truth no matter the cost. In life, there will always be powerful forces that try to bury the truth, sometimes through influence, sometimes through intimidation. But the story of Jasmine and Lucia proves one thing: Speaking the truth isn't just an act of courage, it's the only way to end injustice. Silence might protect you for a moment, but only the truth can set you free forever. If you believe justice should be defended and the truth must be heard, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We'll keep bringing you the powerful stories the mainstream media ignores, stories that touch the heart, shine a light on justice, and awaken the courage within us all.